and welcome to our final LA lesson of the 2019-2020 school year. I'm sure you guys are excited and ready to finish the book Hatchet. Today we will be finishing the chapter, and I'm so excited to get to what's going to happen to Brian at the end of this book. So we are going to read chapter 19, and then there's a thing called an epilogue at the end. And does anybody remember what an epilogue is? Okay, well, an epilogue, if you don't know, is a add-on to the end of a story. So some after time has passed, or they give you a little bit more detail so that it doesn't leave you on like a cliffhanger or anything like that. All right, so I'm excited to get the story going, but a little recap before we go in. Remember, this is the ending of our story. We've been reading this all year long, and so there's probably been a lot of things that you don't remember. For example, he was wearing a blue windbreaker, and that comes into the story a lot. He gets berries in it. He uses the string at the bottom to use it for his bow and arrow because it was able to whip and like create that where the arrow could go and create it for it to go far away. In the last chapter, we just read about him going down into making the raft to go to the airplane because he knew that there was going to be a survival kit down there. And so something along this line was kind of what was in my imagination of him grabbing that survival kit. But he faced a lot of things going into that. He dropped the hatchet, had to go all the way to the bottom of the lake to retrieve it, and it wasn't just like he was standing up. Remember, it was so deep that he almost didn't make it back up because he got stuck down there. So he had to figure out a way to project himself down there faster in order that he may catch his breath or get enough oxygen before he would run out. So he did find the hatchet, and so he was using the hatchet to bust the aluminum on the tail of the plane that was sticking out of the water so that he could retrieve this survival pack. And remember, it got a little scary because when he got in there and tried to retrieve that survival pack, remember what he saw down there? That's right. He saw the pilot's head. And with the pilot's head is just a really disgusting image of him trying to get that out of his head, of the fish eating away the flesh. So it really wasn't the pilot anymore. It was just his bones left over. All right, so I have my survival kit. I have my blue windbreaker on. I'm shooting this a little bit later than I wanted to, so I didn't get to go outside. But if you guys want to take a blanket, go back outside, listen as I read the rest of Hatchet, and find out together how the story ends. I'm really anxious to listen and find out what happens, all right? So if you're following along with me, we're going to be on chapter 19. It'll be towards the end of your packet that you have, and then we'll read the epilogue. All right, you guys ready? All right, here we go. Chapter 19. Treasure. Unbelievable riches. He could not believe the contents of the survival pack. The night before, he was so numb with exhaustion, he couldn't do anything but sleep. All day in the water had tired him so much that in the end he had fallen asleep, sitting against his shelter wall, oblivious, even to the mosquitoes, to the night, to anything. But with false gray dawn, he had awakened instantly and began to dig in the pack to find amazing, wonderful things. There was a sleeping bag. So why do you guys think a sleeping bag would be important if you were out in the middle of the wilderness? And anybody know? A sleeping bag would be important because he would have something to keep him warm on very, very cold nights, or during the mosquitoes. So the mosquitoes wouldn't attack him, so he could bury himself in there. Okay, sleeping bag was in there. but which hung to dry over his shelter roof on the outside. So that was also a way you could use it, was to make it a roof. The foam sleeping pad. And a foam sleeping pad. An aluminum cook set with 4 little pots and 2 frying pans. It actually even had a fork and a knife and a spoon. This pack has a lot of room and was able to hold a lot of things in there. So I can't imagine how much would be in there with all this stuff inside. Okay, so he had an aluminum cook set with 4 little pots and then also some frying pans. A waterproof container with matches and 2 small butane lighters. A sheath knife with a compass in the handle. As if a compass would help him, he thought, smiling. A first aid kit with bandages and tubes of asbestos paste and small scissors. A cap that said Cessna across the front with large letters. Why a cap, he wondered. It was adjustable, and he put it on immediately. A fishing kit with 4 coils of line, a dozen small lures, and hooks and sinkers. Why do you think there was a fishing kit in there? These are things that we probably wouldn't think that would be in a survival kit. But they thought ahead and thought, if you get stuck in the middle of the wilderness, a fishing kit would probably be your main source of getting food to go fishing, to get some food during this time. Incredible wealth. It was like the holidays in the world. All the birthdays there were. He sat in the sun by the doorway where he had dropped the night before and pulled the presents, as he thought of them, out one at a time to examine them, turn them in the light, and touch them and feel them in his hands and eyes. Something at first puzzled him. He pulled out what seemed to be the broken off, bulky, stock-off rifle, and he was going to put it aside, thinking it might be for something else in the pack, when he shook it and it rattled. After working at it, in a moment he found the butt of the stock came off, and inside there was a barrel and a magazine and action assembly with a clip and full box of 50 shells. It was a .22 survival rifle. He had seen one once in the sporting goods store where he went for bike parts, and the barrel screwed onto the stocks. He had never owned a rifle, never fired one, but he had seen them on television, of course, and after a few moments figured out how to put it together by screwing the action onto the stock, how to load it, and put the clip full of bullets into the action. It was a strange feeling holding the rifle. It somehow removed him from everything around him. Without the rifle, he had to fit it in to be part of all of it, to understand it, and to use it in the woods, all of it. With the rifle, suddenly, he didn't have to know. He did not have to be afraid or understand. He didn't have to get close to the foul birds to kill it. Didn't have to know how it would stand if he didn't look at it and moved off to the side. The rifle changed him the minute he picked it up. He wasn't sure he liked the change very much. He set it aside, leaning it carefully against the wall. He could deal with that feeling later. The fire was out, and he used the butane lighter and a piece of birch bark with small twigs to get another one started, marveling at how easy it was, but feeling again that the lighter somehow removed it from where he was, what he had known. With a ready flame, he didn't have to know how to make a spark nest, or how to feed the new flames to make them grow. With the rifle, he wasn't sure he liked the change. Up and down, he thought. The pack was wonderful, but it gave him up and down feelings. With the fire going and sending him black smoke and steady roars from a pitch-smelling chunk, he put on and turned once more to the pack. Rummaging through the food packets, He hadn't brought them out yet because he wanted to save them until last. Glory in them, he came up with a small electronic device completely encased in a plastic bag. At first, he thought it was a radio or a cassette player, and he had a surge of hope because he missed music, missed sound, missed hearing another voice. But when he opened the plastic and took the thing out and turned it over, he could see that it wasn't a receiver at all. There was a coil of wire held together on the side of it by tape, and it sprung into 3-foot-long antenna. And when he took the tape off, no speaker, no lights, just a small switch at the top, and on the bottom he finally found, in small print, emergency transmitter. That was it. He turned the switch back and forth a few times, but nothing happened. He couldn't even hear static. So, as with the rifle, he set it against the wall and went back to the bag. It was probably ruined in the crash, he thought. There was 2 bars of soap. Well, that's a good thing. He probably hasn't taken a bath in months. Ooh. So he had 2 bars of soap. He had bathed regularly in the lake, but not with soap. He thought how wonderful it would be to wash his hair. Thick with grime and smoke dirt, frizzed by the wind and sun, matted with fish and foul-bird grease, his hair had grown and stuck and tangled and grown until it was a clumped mess on his head. He could use the scissors from the first aid kit to cut it off, then wash it with soap. And then finally, the food. All right, we're getting to the good stuff now. It was all freeze-dried and in such quantity that he thought, with this I could live forever. Package after package he took out. Beef dinner with potatoes, cheese and noodle dinners, chicken dinners, egg and potato breakfasts, fruit mixes, drink mixes, dessert mixes, more dinners and breakfasts than he could count easily. Dozens and dozens of them, all packed in waterproof bags, all in perfect shape. And when he had them all out and laid against the wall in stacks, he couldn't stand it, and he went through them again. If I'm careful, he thought, they'll last as long as I need them to last. If I'm careful. No, not yet. I won't be careful just yet. First, I'm going to have a feast. Right here and now, I'm going to cook up a feast and eat until I drop, and then I'll be careful. He went into the food packs once more and selected what he wanted for his feast. A 4-person beef and potato dinner with orange drink for an appetizer and something called a peach whip for dessert. Just add water, it said on one of the packages, and cook for half an hour or so until everything was normal size and done. Brian went to the lake and got water in one of the aluminum pots and came back to the fire. Just that amazed him, to be able to carry water to the fire in a pot. Such a simple act, and he hadn't been able to do it for almost 2 months. He guessed at the amounts and put the beef dinner and peach dessert on to boil. Then he went back to the lake and brought water to mix with the orange drink. It was sweet and tangy, almost too sweet, but so good, and he didn't drink it fast. Held it in his mouth and let the taste go over his tongue, tickling on the sides, sloshing it back and forth, and then down and swallowed then another. That, he thought, that is just fine. Just fine. He got more lake water and mixed another one and drank it fast. Then a third one, and he sat with that near the fire, but looking out across the lake, thinking how rich the smell was from the cooking beef dinner. There was garlic in it, and some other spices that the smells came up to him and made him think of home. His mother cooking, the rich smells of the kitchen. And at that precise instant, With his mind full of home and the smell from the food filling him, the plane appeared. He had only a moment of warning. There was a tiny drone, but at that, as before, it didn't register. Then steadily roaring over his head low, and in the back of the ridge of the bush plane with floats fairly exploded into his life. It passed directly over him, very low, tipped a wing sharply over the tail of the crashed plane in the lake, cut power, glided down into the long part of the L of the lake, then turned and glided back, touching the water gently once, twice, and settling with a spray to taxi and stop, with the floats gently bumping the beach in front of Brian's shelter. He had not moved. It had all happened so fast that he hadn't moved. He sat with the pot of orange drink still at his hand, staring at the plane, not quite understanding it yet, not quite knowing yet that it was over. The pilot cut the engine, opened the door, and got out, balanced, and stepped forward on the float to hop onto the sand without getting his feet wet. He was wearing sunglasses, and he took them off to stare at Brian. "Heard your emergency transmitter, then saw the plane when I came over," he trailed off, cocked his head, and studied Brian. Now, excuse my language. Remember, we talked about this at the beginning, that sometimes there's some language in this book, so don't be offended if you hear some language being taught here, all right? So I'm going to start there. He trailed off, cocked his head, studying Brian. "Damn, you're him, aren't you? You're that kid. They quit looking a month. No, 2 months ago. You're him, aren't you? You're that kid." Brian was standing now, but still silent, still holding the drink. His tongue seemed to be stuck to the roof of his mouth, and his throat didn't work right. He looked at the pilot and the plane, and down at himself, dirty and ragged, burned and lean and tough, and he coughed to clear his throat. "My name is Brian Robeson," he said. Then he saw that the stew was done, and the peach whip was almost done, and he waved to it with his hand. "Would you like something to eat?" And that is the end of chapter 19. So technically, that's where the book ends. We don't know what would happen. But luckily, there's an epilogue. Alright. We have a couple more pages. Not much. Okay. They're stuck together right now. So just 3 pages. The pilot who landed so suddenly in the lake was a fur buyer mapping Cree trapping camps for future buying runs, drawn by Brian when he was unwittingly turned on the emergency transmitter and left it going. The Cree move into the camps for fall and winter to trap, and the buyers fly from camp to camp on a regular route. When the pilot rescued Brian, he had been alone on the L-shaped lake for 54 days. Alright, so 54 days. If we think about how long that is almost so. That would almost be 2 months. Okay, so a little less than 2 months. During that time, he had lost 17% of his body weight. He later gained back 6%, but had virtually no body fat. His body had consumed all extra weight, and he would remain lean and wiry for several years. Many of the changes would prove to be permanent. Brian gained immensely in his ability to observe what was happening and to react to it. That would last him all his life. He had become more thoughtful as well, and from that time on he would think slowly about something before speaking. Food, all food, even food he did not like, never lost its wonder for him. For years after his rescue, he would find himself stopping in grocery stores just to stare at aisles of food, marveling at the quantity and the variety. There were many questions in his mind about what he had seen and known, and he worked at research when he got back, identifying the game and berries. Gut cherries were termed choke cherries and made good jelly. The nut bushes where the foul birds hid were hazelnut bushes. The two kinds of rabbits were snowshoes and cottontails. The foul birds were rough grouse, also called foul hens by trappers for their stupidity. The small food fish were bluegills, sunfish, and perch. The turtle eggs were laid by a snapping turtle, as he had thought. The wolves were timber wolves, which are not known to attack or bother people. The moose was a moose. There were also the dreams. He had many dreams about the lake after he was rescued. The Canadian government sent a team in to recover the body of the pilot, and they took reporters who naturally took pictures and film of the whole campsite, the shelter, all of it. For a brief time, the press made much of Brian, and he was interviewed for several networks, but the furor died within a few months. A writer showed up who wanted to do a book on the complete adventure, as he called it. But he turned out to be a dreamer, and it all came to nothing but talk. Still, Brian was given copies of pictures and tapes, and looking at them seemed to trigger the dreams. They were not nightmares. None of them were frightening, but he would waken at times within them. Just awaken and sit up and think of the lake, the forest, the fire at night, the night birds singing and the fish jumping. Sit in the dark alone and think of them. And it was not bad and would never be bad for him. Predictions are, for the most part, ineffective, but it might be interesting to note that had Brian not been rescued when he had he been forced to go into the hard fall, perhaps winter, it would have been very rough on him. When the lake froze, he would have lost the fish, and when the snow got deep, he would have trouble moving at all. Game becomes unseemingly plentiful in the fall. It's easier to see with the leaves off the brush. But in the winter, it gets scarce and sometimes simply non-existent as predators. Fox, lynx, wolves, owls, weasels, fisher, marten, northern coyotes swept through the areas and wiped things out. It is amazing what a single owl can do to a local population of ruffled grouse and rabbits in just a few months. After the initial surprise and happiness from his parents at his being alive for a week, it looked as if they might actually get back together. Things rapidly went back to normal. His father returned to the northern oil fields where Brian eventually visited him, and his mother stayed in the city, worked at her career in real estate, and continued to see the man in the station wagon. Brian tried several times to tell his father, came really close to doing it, but in the end never said a word about the man or what he knew, the secret. And that is how the book Hatchet ends. All right. I thought it was a very interesting ending to the story. I liked how the epilogue kind of went back and explained different things about what happened after he got back home, how everything in the news was kind of going crazy, but then it just kind of went back to normal. So you now need to go to the next task, which is our flip grid. Do your response to the book. Tell me your favorite part of the book. Try to think back to the memories that you had. And then you'll do a Kahoot for a review. And then you have your last 10-question quiz that you will be doing. I miss you guys, and I hope that you have enjoyed this year and the book Hatchet. If you get a chance, I'll send out over the summer. If you want to watch the movie that kind of goes with this, I'll send out that information. Hopefully, either you can find it on a streaming network or if the library has it and it opens up, maybe you can rent it from there. All right. So have a great summer. If I don't see you until then or hear from you till then, have a great summer, and I hope to see some of you guys in the future. If you're graduating, it has been a pleasure to have you in my classes this year. I will miss you all greatly. All right. See the rest of you in August.